I'm going to attempt to do a mountain scene with a line of trees and a little bit of water in the foreground. I'm using an old photograph from my files of the Tetons, and I've done a value sketch here. I've moved this side of the photograph out so that everything is slightly to the left, just for compositional change. I'm going to be sketching with my liner brush, and I'm going to start on the mountains with a little bit of bluish purple. I'm just using colors that were already on my palette. I'm not after a perfect copy. I'm only just doing an interpretation, and my sketch is loose just to give me some guidelines. By doing these broken lines and using paint, it blends in better with my paints, and I don't have pencil lines. And then down here where my tree line starts, I'm just going to do a little bit of rough sketching. Just to act as a guide. And I've changed to a greenish tone so that that will blend in with my tree colors. And for perspective here, I'm getting bigger and taller here in the front, shorter back here. These trees will be farther away. These will be a little bit closer, and these will be the closest ones over here. Just a hint of where the ground is going to be. Now I'm going to dampen the sky area. I'm using a 3/4 inch angular brush. I don't want to get it too wet, but I do need it a little bit damp. And I'm using a mixture of cobalt blue and phthalo blue. I'm just working around the mountain area. I'm going to start on the mountains now. I'm using a mixture to begin with of quinacridone rose and cobalt blue. I'm working on dry paper. First, I'm going to establish the edges. On this side, I'm adding a little bit of ultramarine blue. Down here at the bottom, I'm just going to soften the edge. Because I want to end up with a feeling of atmosphere back here. We'll see how this works out. By softening those edges, it helps blend with the next layer. I'm also going to lift out a little bit on this light side. And on the shadow side, I'm just going to drop in a little bit of the ultramarine blue mixed with a tiny bit of sepia. Now, because that's very wet, it'll continue to kind of bleed and make some possibly blooms. So we'll see what happens when it gets dry and then go from there. Now that it's dry, I'm going to attempt to do a little bit of dry brush to get some texture into the mountains. I'm using the same mixture of ultramarine blue with a little bit of sepia in it. Back here where the trees are farthest away, I'm going to use the ultramarine blue with a little bit of sepia. Keep it more to the gray tone. I'm using my 3/4 inch angular brush just because I like what it does. I can't tell you this is the right way to do it. It's just simply what I do. Trying to vary the height of the trees. Put in a little bit darker here and there. These are pine trees, by the way. That's why I'm doing them so straight up and down. They grow tall and narrow, trying to reach the sun. As I get a little closer, I'm adding a little bit of hooker green. While that's still wet, I'm going to come back in and darken some of the areas. This will give me tree separations. And this side over here where the trees get closer, I'm using mostly hooker green with a little sepia and not using the blue. I'm just touching with the side of the brush. Give me a little representation of the pine needles that grow. And down here at the base of the pine trees, there's some little shrubs growing. So I've added a little bit of yellow ochre to the hooker green. And I'm going to slightly soften that edge. Now here right next to the water, I'm just going to add a little bit of the yellow ochre by itself. Now that it's dry, I'm going to come back in and re-wet the tree area to try to soften some of these hard lines. As you can see, I hope, I'm getting this quite wet, but I'm not picking up the paint. I'm going to be working on the reflections now. I'm going to wet the water area. And I'll be using the same colors in the water as I used on the trees. It's a combination of hooker green, ultramarine blue, and a little bit of sepia. I'm going to start over here. I'm just touching and pulling the brush down right along the water's edge, I'm going to drop in a little bit of that yellow ochre. I'm using the edge of the brush to represent the same kind of strokes I used on the trees. Now this back here is dried too much, so I'm going to re-wet it since it's a very small area. I'm going to quickly add the shoreline now. I'm just using my 3/4 inch brush again, the angular one, and I'm just touching the shoreline with the sepia. And I'm trying to leave a little bit of white between the shoreline and the reflections to represent the water line. When I'm actually working a painting, I fiddle with it a lot more. This is just a sketch type demonstration, so I'm trying not to overwork it. I'm trying to work quickly, give you an idea of how I do things. Right or wrong, it's my way. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.